to classified prior to its public release. I'm just going to outline a few so people have a general sense for how the process works. First, it's possible that the degree of sensitivity of certain information could have evolved over time due to changing world events or national security interests. It's also possible the details of our cooperation with other countries would be upgraded if their public disclosure could negatively impact U.S. foreign relations. And it's possible that a candid exchange of views among officials, if publicly released, could have a negative impact on foreign relations. Those are general. I'm not referring specifically to this sentence and a half that was upgraded today. But there are a variety of reasons in the regular FOIA process that this can happen.
But that all refers to being upgraded from unclassified to some form of classification, some level of classification.
Correct.
For candid exchanges between officials?
If it could impact, if there's a judgment made by FOIA experts that it could negatively impact foreign relations, yes.
Can you tell us what it was upgraded to?
It was upgraded to secret.
Okay, which is the lowest of the...
There's confidential, which is lower.
Okay. Yes. Now, more generally, there are a lot of other redactions.
Correct. And we tried to set expectations that there would be. Do you have, are you able to tell us what the majority of those redactions were for? Did they, what was the reason? I don't have a breakdown. Next to each redaction, there is a code for the FOIA exemption that's specifically cited, and on our FOIA website, you can take a look at all those codes. I don't know them all by heart, and I haven't done a numerical breakdown of how many apply where. Right. But as I noted, these were provided with very few redactions to the committee. When this one email that we've referenced that has now been upgraded was provided to the committee, it was provided unredacted and unclassified.
And so the committee has...
Because there are different standards for public release under FOIA.
The committee has the unredacted version.
Correct.
Okay, and they have unredacted versions of all of this, or was there stuff that was sent to them that was redacted?
There were very small, there were some redactions, but they were very, very limited. This was an agreement we made with the committee that we would provide them in that form and they would not release them publicly.
Despite the fact that this information was not, as you say, classified at the time
Correct.
It was sent to her.
Correct.
Is it at all troubling or problematic for the department that this kind of information, which is clearly sensitive, even if it wasn't classified at the time, was being passed around on a private server?
Well, I think we've spoken more broadly to this issue in the past in terms of the fact that there was no prohibition from using private email as a public official. We've spoken about this in the past. I don't have much more to add than that. I would again note that this information was not classified at the time.
What was it considered at the time?
Unclassified.
But not even like sensitive, but unclassified?
Had no markings on it.
Had no.
And again, when it got sent to the Hill, it also went in an unclassified form. This, again, as part of the FOIA process, this happens about several times a month on average, where for a variety of reasons under the FOIA law, something that has been previously unclassified is for public release deemed to be classified.
Last one for me on this. When was it that the FBI asked for this to be
Well,
upgraded?
there's been an ongoing interagency process. Every agency that has equities in these emails has at some point in the review process is part of it, as will be the case with the 55,000.
So sometime
there's been an ongoing discussion with the other agencies throughout the last several weeks that we've been doing this.
But is that since they were turned over to the committee, or since it became public knowledge that there was that this private server existed?
Right. So when they went through an interagency process when they went to the committee as well, but using the standards of going to members of Congress who have clearances, not using FOIA standards. So when we made the decision to release these publicly under FOIA standards, a new interagency process started. So we can work backwards. I'm sorry, I don't remember the date. But when we decided to release all of them publicly, we started the new FOIA process, which is a separate process with different standards for public release. They went back to the interagency then, and that's when all of these discussions took place.
Then just remind me, did you guys decide to make all of these public? It was only after it became public knowledge of the private server became public knowledge that you decided to release them all, right?
Well, I can go back and look at the chronology. It's when she turned them all over to us, I think we very quickly said, even before the server issue was discussed, if I remember correctly, that we would undertake using FOIA standards of review to release these publicly. On Tuesday, we'll be making a court filing following up on ours last week, I think, on the 55,000, outlining how we will be undertaking rolling production So periodic production of the remaining 55,000, and that's something we're committed to.
And just on last question, and you may have said this already, and forgive me, but to
It's
be
okay.
clear, because the email and the contents of it was not classified at the time it was sent to her.
Correct.
It's the State Department's opinion that she did not violate any policy. Is that correct?
What kind of what policy are you referring to?
Well, like something within the FAM or something that would suggest she should
That,
not
that
be.
anyone mishandled classified information? Well, it
Correct.
wasn't classified at the time, and the
Therefore-
occurrence of a subsequent upgrade does not mean that anyone did anything wrong. Just to be very clear here. Yes.
On that point, is there in the FBI's request that this now be classified, embedded within that request, the suggestion that it should have been classified on the date on which it was sent?
I have not heard of that. I don't, the answer is I don't know. I haven't heard that in any of the discussions. As I said, this happens pretty regularly, that something is,
But you would
this
concede,
process happens pretty regularly.
you would concede as part of that regular occurrence, it's quite plausible that in some instances, something is upgraded in its classification from unclassified to some measure of classification because it should have been at the time and was
And
not,
that's
correct?
not-
That happens, yes?
That has happened, but in this case, what we're talking about is something not, I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about something that, again, when it went to the Hill was sent unclassified. It went through an interagency review process then when technically it also could have been upgraded. It's my understanding that this was purely using the FOIA standards for public release that the FBI request, and again, I don't want to speak for them, but that the request was made, and ultimately the State Department writes the upgrade memo and signs off on it. So that decision ultimately lies here to do that. But it was at this request. So we decided to do this using the FOIA standards that for public release, this is permissible.
Is it the working supposition of the department right now that it was from some source associated with the Benghazi committee that the New York Times obtained the large trove of emails that it put online?
Honestly, I said this the other day. I've given up guessing where leaks like this come from. As I said, the department certainly didn't provide the emails that were alleged to be part of that trove, which I'm still not going to confirm are actually part of it. But we certainly didn't, and I'm just not going to guess about that.
Do you
It's
know
a game,
whether,
I think, that gets you nowhere.
do you know whether there is an investigation underway to determine how those documents came into the possession of the New York
I
Times?
do not know. I'm happy to check, but I don't know.
Do you happen to know whether, if we were to compare specific documents that appear to be the same ones, from the New York Times trove to those that were officially released today, we would observe different redactions? Because one was sent to the committee and the other was redacted under the FOIA process, as you're making clear.
Well, without commenting on the specific documents that were posted on the New York Times website, if people had in their possession, which they shouldn't, documents that were sent to the committee, and I'm not saying that those are they, okay? I'm not. But the documents that went to the committee would look different than the ones that were released under FOIA because we use different standards. In order to be as transparent as we possibly could with the committee, we agreed to do very minimal redactions so they could see as much information as possible. FOIA standards are more restrictive for public release.
One of the documents released today included an exchange of emails between Cheryl Mills and Matt Olson, who at the time was the head of the National
Of
Counterterrorism
NCTC.
Center. And it was in the fall of 2012. And Mr. Olson was reporting confidentially to Ms. Mills on how he thought congressional hearings about Benghazi were going at that time. Fine, he said, from his perspective. And also reporting on his debriefing or his interrogation by the ARB, the Accountability Review Board, saying that it was an excellent session. And lastly, telling Ms. Mills that the intelligence community, or at least the NCTC, is continuing to fend off questions about the unclassified talking points. You agree that I'm correctly characterizing the correspondence?
I've read all the emails. I remember that one. Broadly speaking, I
Okay.
don't remember the last point about the talking points. I just
Okay.
don't remember seeing that in his email.
It's
I'm
in
happy
there.
to go back and check.
Do you have any thoughts as to the propriety of a senior intelligence official carrying on that kind of correspondence with the Secretary of State's Chief of Staff? What's the reason for it?
When you say what kind of correspondence, how are you characterizing it?
Reporting back to her on how he thinks congressional hearings are going, reporting back to her on how his ARB session went, telling her that he's continuing to fend off requests for information about the unclassified talking points?
So on the third piece, I just honestly, James, don't remember that being in the email. I'm happy to take a look at the email. I'm sure you would walk it up here if you could. We're not going to do that. I'm happy to take.
I'm not going to pull a Lazio on
I'm
you,
happy
but
to take a look at it, but I'm not going to have you read it either. But in general, why would sort of saying it went fine? Why would that be inappropriate?
I'm just not clear on the necessity of a senior intelligence official communicating with the Secretary of State's Chief of Staff about these things.
Well,
I
I'm
don't
not.
understand why.
I'm not clear why you're suggesting there's impropriety. I guess.
I don't know why he's reporting to her on how his debriefing by
Maybe
the ARB went.
maybe it was just a casual conversation. It went well. I'm not sure what the harm in that is. Again, I'm not going to parse every single email or get into the head of what people were thinking at the time, and not having the email in front of me. But
Two more questions.
I'm not entirely sure what you're getting at here. But go ahead, continue.
I think you have some rough idea of what I'm getting at.
I actually sort of don't, but go ahead, continue.
Well, let me ask it before you do your other two.
Okay, certainly, ma'am.
Does the department believe that there was any kind of impropriety in this exchange that he's
Again,
talking
I don't
about?
have the exchange in front of me, but
Do you believe that there is any impropriety evidenced in any of the
I do
emails
not.
that were sent?
I do not.
Okay.
I do not.
One of the emails appears to indicate that on the 15th of September 2012, Secretary Clinton was to receive the presidential daily brief at her home at 9:30 in the morning. And as the set of emails makes clear, including one from the secretary to her aides, she types at 10:43 a.m., "I just woke up, so I missed Dan, who was supposed to deliver the PDB." Putting aside the secretary's sleeping habits,
And yet you felt the need to raise them in the briefing.
as you felt the need to begin the briefing by stating that there were two Fox reporters here today,
I thought I was being welcoming.
my point to you is, aside from the fact that she slept through the PDB,
Putting aside that, go ahead.
was Secretary Clinton a regular consumer of the PDB?
Well, I wasn't here when Secretary Clinton was here. I'm happy to get more details for you. It is my understanding that she was a regular, intense consumer of intelligence in a variety of forms, one of which was the presidential daily briefing. There are other many ways that secretaries of state have intelligence information at their fingertips as well. It is certainly my understanding that she used intelligence quite a bit and very much valued it as one of her sources of information.
Last question. This is somewhat toward the personal side of things, but I wonder if it's been a concern for you and your other colleagues who do these press briefings at the podium, that in having to answer for Secretary of State Clinton's conduct with respect to her private emails and the disposition of those emails, the deletion of some of those emails, that you and your colleagues are in effect being forced to serve as surrogate spokespeople for the Clinton campaign. Is that a concern for you?
I certainly don't feel that way, James. We take it very seriously here that we defend former secretaries of state, their policies, certainly. That is completely independent from any political campaign that may or may not be going on. As I've often said, I am happy in this job to not have to worry about political campaigns. That's why when we talk about these things, we are very factual. We talk about what this department has done, did do in the past to the extent that we can, and quite frankly, stay out of all the politics as much as some of you try to drag us into it.
Well, you defend all former secretaries of state?
Certainly.
On Tuesday, I'll ask you to defend Seward.
Former secretaries of state in the administration in which we serve, and
when what they do is defensible.
And when they're look, when we talk about the policies of this administration, that includes policies under Secretary Kerry and under Secretary Clinton, but we keep it in a very nonpartisan and non-political lane. We, including myself, feel very strongly about that. Incredibly strongly about that this podium is a nonpartisan and a non-political one. And yes, she is running for president, and that is a fact, but that's why when you ask me questions about her, I keep it based on the facts. We keep it based on what the department does as a whole, what Secretary Kerry's doing today in terms of all of these issues, whether it's FOIA or getting things released.
Do you defend her sleeping through the PDB?
I think I'm going to move on. Any more on this?
No, I just feel like I need to ask, when's the next batch coming?
So I think when we make the court filing on Tuesday, I expect that we may, hopefully, be indicating when the first rolling production will be. Secretary Kerry is very focused, as are all of us, on doing this as quickly as possible, and that's certainly a goal. We're going to be expediting more resources to both the congressional production side, because we have a number of outstanding congressional production document requests, but also to reviewing the 55,000 emails for public release. So this is a huge undertaking, certainly, but we are working as quickly as we can, and hopefully we'll be able to say soon when the first rolling production will be. Yes.
And how many would those be?
We're trying to determine that right now. It may not be the same every time. We're just as many as we can get done, basically, by that date. And given, some of these emails won't have other agency equities involved, so those will probably be done a little quicker. But when you have all these other agencies, it's just a process that takes a little longer. Yes.
Yeah, going back to the change in the classification level of
The upgrade.
redacted,
It wasn't
upgrade,
classified to begin with. Yes.
You had said that this is a fairly regular thing or routine
It happens about
process.
several times a month in FOIA requests.
Would the fact that this is as routine as that kind of highlight the flaw in the policy of allowing people to send emails on personal servers if there's routinely information that is then upgraded in classification
Well,
level?
but you're, I think, assuming something about the reason for upgrade. And oftentimes, the reason for upgrade is because it's not appropriate to be released publicly under FOIA. That's different than it being unclassified and being sent around on an unclassified email.
Sure.
So those are just different standards. So I think you're just making an underlying assumption about why things are necessarily upgraded, which is not necessarily the case.
But private servers, probably almost in every instance, are probably less secure than government servers. And if there's information that's routinely upgraded in classification because it's determined that it's actually not something that
But
you
those
want
are
released.
well, go ahead, sir. You can finish
Well,
and then I'll let you continue.
In that case, doesn't that highlight a potential security threat with the way that information is handled or has been handled in the past in this building?
I mean, I think you're making a broad statement. There's a variety of reasons that things can be upgraded.
But if one of those reasons is that information is too sensitive to be seen in the public.
But that doesn't mean that if it wasn't being released publicly, it would have been upgraded. Do you see what I'm saying? Independent of public release, that doesn't mean it would have been classified.
But there are other ways it could get out, especially if it's on a private server.
I understand the question, but I think I've answered
When you
it.
say, talk about these retroactive,
It's not retroactive. It doesn't go back. It just starts going
all right,
forward.
okay, the wrong word, sorry. When you
It's
talk
okay,
about
just a
changing the
key point.
classification or making something
Upgrading.
classified, you say it happens often several times a month, but does it happen several times a month with people's private emails? Or are these within
It
the
happens-
state.gov emails?
I mean, it happens several times a month in FOIA requests. I don't have more details than
But
that.
normally, FOIA requests cover just state.gov emails, right?
That's true. Yeah.
So you have no way of knowing on private email accounts how many times this has happened
I
or how
just
many
don't-
times it
I
does.
just don't
Okay.
have those kinds of
Can I go back to the Blumenthal emails?
You can.
Not the ones that were in that the New York Times published yesterday, but the ones, and there are quite a few of them. And I think
There
that
are.
despite the fact that you don't want to confirm that the ones that were published yesterday are the ones here, it's pretty clear that they
I'm
are.
happy to talk about the ones we released today.
Right, so just confining ourselves to the ones that are released today. Does the department think it's appropriate for some kind of outside political, former political advisor to be sending the secretary, this kind of stuff, and for the secretary then to be passing it on, even when the information is occasionally deemed to be dubious or without merit?
Well, I think secretaries of state often hear from a variety of outside voices. They often get advice or information from a variety of places. And as I think people have now seen, hopefully in the documents, sometimes the secretary passed these on. Sometimes they made judgments that they didn't seem credible, didn't do much, it appears, beyond that. But again, this is, secretaries often get information from a variety of sources.
Many of these emails that were the secretary then passed on to Jake Sullivan, or deputy chief of staff, who then circulated them as he saw it. Are you aware of any among people who are still in the building who were there? Or were there any senior officials who were kind of annoyed by the fact that they kept getting emails from Jake saying a friend of HRC says this?
I don't know. I haven't heard that, Matt. I haven't heard that, but I would note most of the people on those emails, or many of them, I think. Many of them aren't here anymore, but I haven't heard
No, but
that.
they were sent to a variety
Some are.
of career
I just haven't heard that.
staffers.
Again, we get the number of emails that all of us get from people on the outside who we know or have known for a long time or are friends with, who have some information that they think is interesting to share happens quite a bit. It's certainly not unusual.
Sure, but not everyone has the secretary's
That's
private,
true.
personal
That is
email
true. That is very true.
account. So you can say without a doubt that the information or alleged information that Mr. Blumenthal was sending to Secretary Clinton on a regular basis didn't get any more weight than did actual intelligence coming from
Well, I
the
think she or
INR
her
in this
team.
building.
I think
or-
she or her team could probably speak. I can't speak to that.
Right.
I wasn't here. Yes. Anything else on this issue? Go ahead.
Cuba.
Cuba.
I just spent a week in Cuba and I talked with a lot of LGBT rights advocates critical of the government. One of them told me that the Cuban government is out to, quote, destroy them. So I wanted to ask you, Marie, if with the fourth round of talks about normalizing relations that just wrapped up today, and I haven't seen the readout or anything yet because it just happened, but was human rights at all part of this specifically? And if so, can you give a little sense of, because that's still obviously a huge concern.
It's still a huge issue.
Yeah.
And just a little bit of a readout. We did make significant progress on a number of substantive issues in this round. This round of talks was a productive one. As you know, and everyone knows, we've met regularly, have been in constant communication. We will continue to discuss with the Cubans the practical conditions needed to implement this new policy that the president outlined. And I can find out some more if human rights was raised today. The answer is I actually don't know, but I do know that it is an issue we continually raise with the Cubans, that even while we are working to normalize relations and open an embassy and reestablish diplomatic relations, we know we will still have very serious concerns with what is happening on the human rights front, and that certainly if and when we are able to reestablish relations, that certainly won't be unique to Cuba.
Right.
Many countries we have relations with, certainly we raise concerns about human rights, so we'll keep raising those concerns. But let me find out if it was
Yeah.
raised today.
And just as a
I just
quick-
don't know.
And as a quick follow-up to that, I just was made aware by my colleague at the White House who said that, I'm reading what Josh Ernest just told me, concern for human rights of LGBT Cubans is among reasons for policy change to reopen
Absolutely.
U.S.-Cuban relations. So any thought on that?
Absolutely. It's one of those areas where we believe that if there's more ability for Cubans to have access to the outside world and contact with Americans or others from the outside world, if there's more back and forth travel between America and Cuba or other countries in Cuba, if Cuba is more open to the world on all of these issues, including LGBT issues, we think that's a net positive because there will be more outlets to express some of these issues, to discuss them, to hopefully change them. And I think that certainly underpins a lot of the new policy.
And then my final question, do you have any possible timeline as to when an announcement might happen? We might hear something about embassies reopening to
don't.
allow further diplomats to travel outside Havana to meet with some of these folks who criticize the government.
Yeah, I really don't. I wish I could give you a timeline. Believe me, I wish I could, but I really don't.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We can ask
Yes.
a follow-up question. In their comments earlier today, both Jacobson and Vidal referenced what they called the functioning of embassies as being one of the issues that was broadly discussed over the past 2 days. Is that an indication that one of the remaining sticking points is the level of freedom that diplomats would have to move around in Cuba